Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MicroStrategy Mondays. This is episode number 9. My name is Anders. This is the show I try to do every single Monday around 5 p.m. PST, where I invite what I consider some of the world's foremost experts on MicroStrategy, seen from a financial perspective. People who both understand Bitcoin very well and understand the financial world very well, because that does seem to be that overlap, that sweet spot that you need to be in to really understand and appreciate what Michael Saylor is doing, what MicroStrategy is doing, and how they, in my opinion, helping to a far extent, really significantly, Bitcoin hyper-Bitcoinization, adoption of Bitcoin as global money. On that note, I want to welcome Dan Hillery and Tim Kotzman. Now, Dan, I learned when typing in your name for the show that you are not related to the Clintons. Well, that's Hillary Clinton. Obviously, that's the first name, so that's. Oh, there we go. But and then Tim, who I believe works on Wall Street and is the man with the financial disclaimer. But today I am hoping to hear a lot more from Tim than the financial disclaimer, and find out what's actually going on there, because Tim has an excellent podcast. He is really good at asking great questions and being silent and letting the people come out with all their knowledge and their stories. So hopefully today we can put some spotlight on Tim as well, and get some information and out of you, Tim, and some opinions. But yeah, guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Our pleasure. Super excited.
But why don't we start with the financial disclaimer anyway, Tim? Because it is important that I'm not being held liable, or you are not being held liable for any financial comments, because this is only entertainment. But why don't you say it?
Yeah, hopefully it's educational, informational. What Dan Hillary is going to say is probably going to be amazing, but it's not financial advice. Yeah. So yeah, what a year. Being surrounded by guys like Dan and Ben Workman and Punter Jeff. Yeah, I feel like I have a pulse on just the reality that from MicroStrategy on down, you have more and more companies, public and private, really looking to put Bitcoin on their treasury and follow, to some extent, the MicroStrategy handbook. So it's awesome to be associated with all these guys and constantly learning. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, definitely. Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, watching Quant Bros and hearing Jeff and Ryan, all the insights they have is so educational. I'm watching the especially the Q3 earnings call from Michael Saylor was such a what do you call it, a watershed moment? Is that the expression? Of corporate finance and Bitcoin history. The way he is able to target all these different financial markets and demands, and package a Bitcoin proxy with maybe less upside and then less downside, less volatility, and arbitraging that upside there actually is in Bitcoin to the benefit of the MicroStrategy holder, while he's serving all these markets, and just really kind of printing sats to the balance sheet is phenomenal. Dan, what about you? How do you see this whole MicroStrategy history over the last 12 months, and the community that's grown, and the MicroStrategy True North that you are part of, the excellent show going live every Wednesday evening?
I feel so fortunate to be around guys like you, and I think everyone brings their own sort of expertise to the table. And so we're just, everyone's got, as Tim said, everyone's got a finger on the pulse. Everyone's got a little different perspective, and we come together, and like, without this sort of collection of knowledge, like, how could we be as, highly convicted, make as prudent decisions, block out the noise and distraction? Because if it weren't for this sort of, community, I don't like that word, but that we've created, like the FUD, the noise, all of that would just be it would be too much to handle. So yeah, I couldn't be happier and more proud to be a part of this little group.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and it's for me, I always love the early process in anything happening, and just watching those things happen in 2024. And I joined relatively late. I did get family members into MicroStrategy in 21, and I'm all in cold storage Bitcoin, and then there was things back in September that made me say, like, I need some exposure to this. So I don't have a lot of exposure, but I do find it super interesting, and it's great to see this whole thing play out and develop, and more people joining the groups on X, etc. So Tim and Dan, both of you, but let's start with you, Tim. What's your thoughts on strategic Bitcoin reserve potentially being announced? We know that there's some executive orders that he hasn't signed many yet, or made many of them public yet. But that may or may not happen. Like, any thoughts around that and MicroStrategy, and is it today? Is it in 100 days? And how would that affect MicroStrategy potentially?
Well, I guess I'll start with the end of your question, and something that I picked up on New Year's Eve, when Jeff actually asked Michael Saylor. He said, "Hey," well, he said he congratulated him on QQQ inclusion, and he said, "Did you think it was going to happen?" And Saylor said, "We have a low expectation around any of these things happening, because we have a plan and we're going to execute on that plan regardless of whether certain things happen or don't happen." So I think MicroStrategy is going to be just fine whether we get a Bitcoin strategic reserve or not. I mean, arguably they were like either causing or continuing part of the last bull run. So I find it hard to believe that anything's really going to knock them off course at this point. As far as, I think the nuance of a stockpile versus a reserve could actually come into play, meaning whether it's tonight, tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, some sort of executive order for a stockpile that we're not going to sell what we have, and maybe some sort of legal workaround of, hey, we're going to start to purchase a certain amount that they feel they can legally do through an EO, but then also start the process as soon as possible, but probably not this week, of getting that legislation through Congress so that it's really as solid as it can be moving forward with an actual reserve passing Congress. So those are kind of trying to combine every single thing you're hearing from all directions, kind of where I'm sitting and what my expectation would be.
Right. So that's interesting. But what are you saying is the difference to you between a stockpile and a reserve? Is that something about it has to be held and not sold in any situation, or how do you see that? Or did I misunderstand there? You were talking about it as if it was two different things, or did I misunderstand?
I'm viewing the stockpile as basically them just coming out with an EO saying, hey, we're not going to sell what we already have, to the extent that we could legally hold on to it, and maybe add to it, but only to a certain extent that their lawyers are saying, hey, you can add to it, but we really need Congress to get behind this to really get it to the 200,000 or million or 4 million coins that we're really trying to get to.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Dan, what's your thoughts on any of that? Whatever.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tim says. I'm by no means an expert here on the legislation and regulation surrounding the reserve. I am a big betting odds guy, so the betting odds still look quite favorable, in my opinion, for such a sort of black swan event, in the sense that a black swan event would be the reserve being approved. In terms of managing expectations, I think that's one thing people need to keep in mind, is that a strategic Bitcoin reserve would be incredible, right? But we're going to have SAB 121 repealed. We're going to have pro-crypto regulation. Like, everything is lining up in a completely insane trifecta over the next 6 months. So don't, like, like people are, if they think they're going to get something, but then come up a bit short, they're very sad, right? So that's just how people's expectations work. And so right now, strategic Bitcoin reserve is kind of distorting people's expectations. I think people should, every day we should take the positive gains, move one step forward, and then, hope for that crazy event to happen. But yeah, I take it one day at a time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And probably like Sailor, it's good to have lower expectations. Then you can only be positively surprised. But I think, whatever people's political opinion are or is, and we don't need to go into that, then there is no doubt that the previous administration was anti Bitcoin. And I don't even like to use the word crypto, but they were very anti-Bitcoin, and Trump is very pro-Bitcoin, and that is it's good for clarity, it's good for Bitcoin, and therefore it's also very good for MicroStrategy. So for that, I'm very happy and optimistic for the future for MicroStrategy. So I've obviously as a MicroStrategy shareholder done a lot of thoughts about how the price played out in Q4. With first there was a massive pump after the Q3 announcement, and the price shot up to 540 or something, and then he hit the ATM. And so the thinking, and this is what I want to hear you guys' opinion on, looking at all of that in hindsight, it seems because Saylor needs to keep volatility high, because that's the product at which he can attach all these different financial products, convertible bonds, preferred stock, ATM shares, etc. But so to me, it makes sense if he drives up the price several weeks in a row, doing something super accretive without issuing too many shares. That pumps the price a lot. And then if he hits the ATM for a long time, like many weeks in a row, and people start whining because the price is down of the stock, yet it is very accretive on the amount of Bitcoin per stock. If he does that, it seems to me that he's getting more of that volatility instead of doing 1 week convertible, 1 week ATM, but pushing the price up. Then he pushes it down with the ATM, and maybe that's something that will happen within a quarter, that he'll, have a pump in one direction and then he'll hit the ATM to take advantage of that. But I very easily could be very wrong here. It's just some thinking I've done, and that's why I want to hear you guys' opinion. I guess also there's another aspect, and that is he has used way more of the ATM than the convertible bonds. So I'm hoping and guessing that it may be the convertible bonds that he'll be focusing on. And he has been talking about Q1 is for levering up again, because right now they have so little debt compared to asset. But why don't we start with you, Dan? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's the right question to ask, and it's something we're all trying to figure out too, because it's what is by chance and what's by choice and decision making on MicroStrategy's part, right? Because as the price of Bitcoin rises and their stock rises and they're issuing debt or they're not issuing debt, the options markets, the gamma, it's effectively a gamma squeeze, right? Like as the price starts ripping and Bitcoin, the underlying is ripping, the whole thing kind of snowballs and pedals up, even with some ATM selling. But what is the effect of, the low leverage right now? I think we've seen a decline in volatility, right? So if you look at the volatility charts, volatility's down, as you're saying, but he's going to want to ramp it back up. And it's a twofold system, right? He wants to ramp it back up for the effect of the volatility, but he also wants to ramp it back up to expand that net asset value multiple to be more accretive when selling at the money, so at the market. So you're totally right in that it's a double-edged sword. He needs to leverage, he needs to bring it up, and then he needs to crash it down. But the really interesting thing about the price movements that we saw previously is when he issued that $3 billion worth of convertible debt, when the price fell from 520 to whatever it was, 400 in a very short period of time, all of that was captured and locked in as gains for those convertible debt arbitrageurs. So the way it works is the stock has to fall for them to make profit. And I think, Tim, that might be what you were hearing at the party as well, is that was a hugely accretive move for institutional convertible bond holders. And so, we as retail holders have to be able to experience both the upside and downside volatility, because different forms of volatility are different or more beneficial for different groups of people.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Tim, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that Saylor has an advantage of pushing it in one way and then pushing it the other way, or what's your thoughts about this whole making sure there's still volatility in the stock and creating that to be able to sell the different products at favorable terms?
I think there's a few different things at play and a few things to really mention. One, yes, the theme and the communication that volatility is vitality is definitely in play. But I think there's a notion out there, and I think some of the other guys have touched on this and hopefully put it to rest. But I think there's some notion out there with the meme about hitting the ATM that there's like this pedal underneath someone's desk and they're just like pushing on it whenever they want. But the reality is that it's predetermined, it's preset, it's pre-planned for what they're going to do based on either volume or some other metric. So there, because otherwise it could be construed as manipulation. So
Right.
it's preset, and then as far as I love to think about each of these things, whether it's additional shares or convertible debt or now preferred stock as different products, because certainly
Yeah.
they are. And like tomorrow or next week, they could come out with a fourth product or a fifth product that serves another portion of the traditional market. I think that's the really interesting thing, is to just have all of these different tools in your toolbox that at a certain point, even if each one of them is thoughtfully planned out, you can strategically use them, almost like adding instruments to a symphony, and it could just get really interesting and obviously just a benefit to the shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm sure the three of us all watched the Q3 earnings call live. I think that there was 4,000 in total. I'm pretty sure I can count you two in there, unless you were busy that evening and you watched it later or next day or something. But I think to me that was very impressive, and he explained all these different financial products. Granted, I don't work in the finance world. But at the time I thought, wow, like he's nailed it all down. He's got all the products in there, and I didn't hear anyone talk about, including myself, that, well, we're missing preferred stock. But then he came out with the preferred stock, and we all like, wow, that was really smart as well. And as I understand, the conversion is at a much higher price than convertible bonds. Of course, I've listened to Ben Workman, who was on here last week, and he's super smart and knowledgeable when it comes to the convertible bonds and the different debt structures. But I remember him talking about, like, say the price is about 350 today on this stock, but the preferred stock may not convert until the stock is up at 1100, so it'll act a lot more like a debt instrument. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's spot on. And the one thing that has come to mind every time that you mentioned the Q3 earnings call is that in the interview I just did with the CEO of Cooler, KULR, he in the interview, and of course, like, we didn't talk beforehand, so I didn't know, it was all new to me. I'm sitting there asking him when his orange pill moment was, and he's like, "Oh, the Q3 earnings call with MicroStrategy." I'm like, "What?" That's like, we're so early that sometimes even in my seat, I'm like, "Wait, what? Like, you just like it clicked for you like a couple months ago, and now you're a public company putting Bitcoin on your own balance sheet." So that's really, to me, an indicator of
Wow.
one, obviously how early we are, but how quickly this can move, right? From the Q3 earnings call to now, they have, I think, two tranches of around 20 or $21 million worth of Bitcoin on their balance sheet, 41 million. I mean, that didn't take a year. It didn't take 6 months. So I think you're going to have some of these fast followers, and it's going to be really interesting to watch.
I gotta just ask you a question here. Did you say that was the CEO? Because I'm sorry, I didn't see your last. I've been quite busy the last 13 days here of my life, so it's the first time since really getting into MicroStrategy myself, exposure, and running MicroStrategy Mondays, that I haven't consumed pretty much all MicroStrategy content because of I I used to live in Pacific Palisades, and that home burned down. So I haven't seen your interview. That's why I'm explaining here. Was that the CEO of MicroStrategy that had his orange pill moment in Q3? You said.
No, the CEO of KULR, they're an energy
Oh, okay.
storage company.
Okay, gotcha.
And yeah, the CEO, Michael Moe, was at the New Year's Eve party. He posted a picture of him with Sailor, and yeah, they've started issuing shares at the market to buy Bitcoin and put it on their balance sheet. So kind of another follower, similar. I shouldn't say similar to Semler, but in addition to
So
Semler.
what do you guys think about that, Dan? If I ask you, because we saw Sailor, especially with Q3, just really outlining this is an amazing playbook to keep accumulating more Bitcoin per stock by doing these different moves. And then we've seen Semler, and there's is it Metaplanet, right? Dylan Leclerc in Japan, and others. Then and Marathon also sold convertible bonds. So all of these companies are now, not to the same extent, because MicroStrategy is already massive, but all of these companies are really starting to follow suit, and that does seem like a bit of a snowball effect to me, because we went from one at the beginning of last year, more or less, to what is it now, 10 in total, and it's newer coming almost monthly, it seems. What's your thoughts on that, Dan? What's your expectations going forward? How will these guys be successful also in attracting the different financial investors, the convertible bonds buyers, etc.? Can they find something that they feel is compatible with what MicroStrategy is doing, or how do you see all that play out? And do you think we can expect more companies to join the MicroStrategy Bitcoin playbook?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because I've thought a lot about that. Like, why would you invest in one of these companies as opposed to MicroStrategy? If you're a convertible arb shop, what is attractive about a company like this? And well, so one, I think you need to think of it, or I try to think of it from like a traditional perspective. If you're an investor, you want to allocate capital. And I think Tim, Andrews, and myself probably wouldn't even purchase an equity that doesn't have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So I wouldn't, right? But now, once you got these small cap companies, these zombie companies, starting to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, you can start to look at their underlying business. And so, I've done research on both Cooler and Semler a bit, and you can start seeing the attractive nature of these cash flow generating businesses and think, okay, maybe I do invest in that company for future growth. Like maybe the Bitcoin will stimulate their own operations and, will prolong their existence. It acts as almost a call option on the underlying business. And, you want to hold that company for the long term. In terms of what MicroStrategy is doing as opposed to these other companies, Q3 earnings was a great way, or it really highlighted the way in which MicroStrategy was able to leverage the 99.5% of their equity structure being backed by Bitcoin, right? So any other company that doesn't have this complete Bitcoin backing won't be able to offer the same products as MicroStrategy. So a KULR convertible note will largely be a convertible note with a call option on the underlying business that's in existence, whereas the MicroStrategy convertible debt is a Bitcoin-backed security. And so that's a huge difference, and I think we'll start to see that play out. But let's say you're a little scared of Bitcoin. Let's say in 20 years, Bitcoin's CAGR has dropped, and you do want a partial call option on Bitcoin and a partial call option on a growth company, right? Semler would be a super exciting convertible note to purchase in that scenario. So I think it's opening up the sort of avenue for Bitcoiners to diversify into different businesses if they so choose, while still having their assets and their equity protected by something known like Bitcoin.
Right. No, that makes great sense. And it does make it a safer, more interesting investment in buying into a company where you like the business model, but hey, they're backed by, they're actually also putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So it's not exactly the same as MicroStrategy, but now you're looking at both the business and them being backed by Bitcoin. What's your thoughts, Tim, on how we've gone from just MicroStrategy to now more companies? How is, to which extent it's going to spread, and just in general, your thoughts on that?
So I've heard in several different conversations of private companies or individuals looking for public or private companies to maybe take public to do the Bitcoin strategy. So I think that's very encouraging. My thought process and outlook has kind of changed from a few months ago when I just thought MicroStrategy, MicroStrategy, and also MicroStrategy. I was getting text messages from friends who are very successful business people saying, "Oh, well, any Bitcoin equity I'm going to invest in." And I saw that initially as them just chasing any kind of copycat or squirrel that had something shiny called Bitcoin in its little paw. And I was like, I don't know if that's a great idea. But then I started having more conversations, including with Dan, and thinking from a couple different directions. But in particular, if they are starting, and I guess this basically is like the diminishing returns theory. If MicroStrategy is at $100 billion, like they could do a 10x and go to a trillion. They could do a 100x and go to 10 trillion. But like at a certain point, do the numbers just keep going up, or does it get ridiculous, or is it only sound ridiculous to us because the numbers are not like 1 through 10? And I think the point I'm trying to get at is if a Semler or a Cooler or somebody else, right? If MicroStrategy stock's at 500, but Semler's at 50, and these are not exact numbers, and Cooler's at 5, then does the smaller number, almost like a meme coin, have more running room? Maybe. I'd be intrigued to hear Dan's thoughts on that, because it's just, yeah, it's kind of, but if they're not truly levered long, maybe not. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to wrestle with right now.
Right.
That's the exact way to think about it. That's the hardest question we're all trying to answer, I think, is looking at these companies. What's the strength of their cash flows? What's the intention of the strategy? Because Saylor has been so intentional about being levered long and then offering these different products. And that needs, for this strategy to be as effective for another corporation, they have to reflect those principles, in the management communications. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to also just bring up this question from Howard Wetzman, and because this is actually something that I personally, talking about the Bitcoin cycle, that's something that that I have been super interested in and focused on, amongst others on eToro, where I'm a so-called they have social investing, and I'm a popular investor that other people can copy, and so this is something I have had a lot of focus on, although I will basically the 4-year Bitcoin cycle. Although I would say to some extent now I do find just MicroStrategy in itself as an investment really, really attractive and interesting, because it is that outperformance of Bitcoin. But if you go to you first, Dan, what are your thoughts on this 4-year cycle? I presume that's what Howard is talking about. And if you have any, you may not focus on this at all.
Yeah, I think about it all the time, and
Sweet.
I really like cross-border capital's liquidity cycle model, and I think it's all liquidity. So I'm a pretty big sort of like looking at the historic NASDAQ 100 and Bitcoin correlation. I'm a pretty big, like at this point, the halving doesn't have a massive effect on price, maybe a delayed effect. I'm also I don't think the presidential cycle is necessarily the driving force for these cycles. Again, I think it's global liquidity. It's the rolling over of corporate and national debt every 4 years. And that's really driving this kind of expansion and contraction in the monetary supply. And, Bitcoin's just a vacuum for those excess dollars. So I really, really believe strongly in that. I don't know what it'll look like continuing, right? All our guesses are just guesses at this point. But in terms of leverage, absolutely. Like I could not carry leverage at the peak of a liquidity cycle and sleep at night by any means.
No, yeah. And the big question is, so when do you expect the peak to be it? And I can't wait to come with my own thoughts on that. But do you have a thought on that? Like, when do you expect, unless it is the super cycle, which I think pretty much only can be ended by US and Russia and China and Saudi and all other countries start just FOMOing and like, we gotta get Bitcoin, and then it's hard to see a bear market when Trump and others start competing to own as much Bitcoin as possible. I don't see a 1-year bear market there, but when do you see it? But if that doesn't happen, when do you think we'll see a peak, Dan?
Yeah, historically, the liquidity cycle should peak around September, October next year, and there tends to be a 8 to 12 week lag in risk assets before they start to take a dump. But I'm not going to be betting that far out. So by June, I will be pretty much delevered. And depending on prices, like when you're sitting at 2, 3, 400K at Bitcoin, right, and your models put you at a stable million in 5 to 15 years, you want to be careful at that point. That's at least how I look at it.
So when you say next year, you still mean you mean
I mean, this year,
25, right?
Yeah, 25.
Yeah. Okay, got you. What about you, Tim? What's your thoughts on cycle? Do we have the 4-year cycle? When do you think this current bull run, which we absolutely are in a bull run, obviously, per both definition and emotions, I would say, when do you think it's going to end, and what's your thoughts in general about that?
Yeah, so I'm staying cognizant of the peak historically being 12 to 18 months after the halving, which would be Q2, Q3, Q4 of this year. I think with the introduction of the ETFs and corporate adoption, whether that be MicroStrategy and or others, that you're not going to see the extent of the drawdowns that you saw before. So if there was an 80% drawdown, maybe it's a 50% drawdown. That seems to be a lot of what people have been communicating that, are just on social media, analysts. And then to your point, Anders, if we do see the US or other countries, it would just kind of be this, like maybe you still technically have a cycle, in the same way that you can say we've had bull and bear markets over the past 100 years, but really it's just been one bull market if you really zoom out far enough. So I think that's really kind of, it's appreciated if to be really specific when you're describing what time period and like what you're really describing. Like we're bear markets are outlawed. Okay, well what do you mean by that? So I think really the next couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months could be really informative as far as, are we going to have nation states buying into this, or is it some muted version of what we thought?
Yeah. And what an exciting time to be alive, to actually, we could be hours away, we could be maybe a couple of months away from finding out if the nation state Bitcoin frenzy starts now or not. And I think we'll easily top out at 250, if not higher, but let's just say minimum 250, $100,000 this year on Bitcoin without nation state adoption. Nation state frenzy, the sky is the limit, kind of, I guess. And that, I think, as I said before, I think could eliminate a bear market, and that's why I'm not even going to say a top could be 600,000, because it may just, if the bear market is gone, that means we just keep going up. Not in a straight line. Nothing ever goes up in a straight line, but definitely up over time. My own thoughts, I do believe that the halving still plays enough of an impact to, if you look at where the price is now and how has it moved since 2013, which is 12 years in Bitcoin, is such a long time. I mean, even go back to 12, it's such a long time, and that cycle really has been intact for that many years. So my thoughts are that in 17 we had the peak in December of 17, and then in 21, 4 years later, it came a little bit before. It came in November. And why did it come a little bit before? Well, it likely is because the 4-year cycle is actually a little bit less than a 4-year cycle, because the hash rate in generally trends up. It means it takes a little bit less than 4 years to reach the next halving. And that was also the case with the last halving that happened last year around the 21st of April. And I remember in 2020 it happened the 11th of May. So it is moving forward a little bit. So that's why I think that October this year is the most likely month of a forward top. And I say most likely month because it's all probabilities, and that could still come in December, and it could come in June even, as you said, Dan. But in terms of when it comes to leverage, so again, I only put a little bit into this my brokerage account for that I created to get some MicroStrategy. And so it's a little play money, and it's both MicroStrategy and then also a little bit of MSU, which is highly risky, and people should not invest into that unless they understand the multiple risks there are for being wiped out. I think I've said it pretty clearly now that that's not something to even consider unless you look into what the risks are of a 2x leverage ETF on a stock. But my own take is in terms of when to exit leverage, I will latest exit that MSTU position in October, probably early October, because then I've also held it for 1 year, which pushes it over the from income tax to capital gains, I guess. And I will say that I've already I've made a rule for myself, and the times that I've kind of missed opportunities or lost money is when I didn't follow the personal rules I made for myself when it came to investing. And the rule I made here in this small portfolio of MicroStrategy and MSTU is that I will only allow MSTU to have a certain percentage of that portfolio. And anytime it went above that, I would just strictly sell the MSTU, even though the euphoria hits and you think it could be much higher tomorrow. Kept just selling and putting that money into MicroStrategy. So I already exited 20% of my MSTU position by, I think that was mid-October when we were peaking that much, and haven't touched it since, because then it's been down. But that's definitely all gone by October. Interestingly, on Fidelity, they're right now paying me 7% a year to borrow my MSTU. So there must be quite a shorting market, because it started at, I think, 4.5%. And then I check in on it every now and then, and the rate has changed according to the market. So I'm getting 7% for lending that out. And
Wow.
next time, it's interesting, right?
Well, yeah, we love those statistics. I know Grain of Salt and Tim and I look at the lending rate, even just against MSTR when things get a little bit overheated. That's an awesome metric to have.
Yeah, it tells you something about the short interest, I guess. Can you guys tell me, just so I know what I'm doing here, it is completely over collateralized, those people that lend it, right? Or companies or whatever. It's collateralized with dollars, which means I'm doing it relatively risk-free, right?
Yeah, it's risk-free.
It's risk-free.
Risk-free. Yeah. The brokerage would have to fail. The brokerage and the custodian, that being Fidelity, probably is your counterparty. Yeah.
And I'm not afraid of that. I mean, I have the stock in there anyway, so if they failed, right, it's all gone. They have not board the MSTR. I don't know. Do you know of anyone, you or others, where there is enough demand for that? I may not have enough, to be honest.
Tim, have you heard anything? I know I haven't heard of anything this cycle yet.
Right. Okay.
Just, so much APM. There's plenty of shares out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of shares now, and he's been issuing more shares, as we very well know, which is very accretive, which is good. So another thing also I wanted to ask you guys, instead of it's only the questions that I have, I think everyone, including you guys, have some thoughts on MicroStrategy that that you're really excited about, and something that is kind of maybe your edge in terms of how you look at this whole investment. So like a question to you guys, where really it's up to you what you want to focus on, but is there something that you're seeing that you feel not enough people talk about, or they underappreciate it, or it doesn't get any focus at all? Like what excites you about MicroStrategy, and how do you see this play out with things that maybe I mean, whichever kind of thoughts you may have that you would want to share, because I know, Dan, you are very deep into playing the options market. Tim, I'm not 100% sure what your sort of angle are, is outside of owning MicroStrategy shares. But why don't we start with you, and if there's anything in particular that you think needs to be highlighted?
And I think Tim has such a good perspective into just the general sentiment, the legislation, the different companies, the corporate sentiment again. So like, I guess I have a question for Tim. Is like, okay, so out of all these companies hitting you up, curious about the strategy, looking into it, between the Trump administration, between the SAB 121, banks custodying Bitcoin, and the adoption of FASB, fair value accounting rules, like, it would seem like there's companies, gung ho, ready to put this strategy into place, and a lot of companies that wouldn't have done it prior to these different changes. Am I off the mark there, or is that something you're hearing as well?
I think you're on the mark. I think out of our group, Ben is probably the one hearing the most inbound from different companies, where he might be seeing more of a theme than I would be seeing. So I'm excited to catch up with him on that, and just get a little more updated. But between everything that you just said about SAB 121 being repealed, I can tell you, because it's in the interview I did with Eric Semler. I mean, he said, we're super happy with our custodians, but he said, we're also excited for us to get to the next level, where we have the JP Morgans of the world able to be custodians. And then, this is just me speaking now, but like, then getting to where it's not just a single custodian, but why wouldn't everyone want a multi-custodial solution? And not just because one of them sponsors my podcast, but like literally from a security and safety, right, and fiduciary standpoint. I think those are some of the things that you're going to see coming. And then, like, Anders, to kind of answer your question, like, I own MicroStrategy shares. I also own an options ladder. Like, I could not be more long. And I think between the liquidity cycle and the clear communication from MicroStrategy, which obviously comes from Saylor, but then even just the more nuanced things, such as he's never been wanting to get involved or even associated with any politics at all. And over the last couple of days, you see him standing there with Vivek and, Jared Kushner. And like, I feel like the writing's on the wall, and if it's not, then I guess I'm just wrong. But I just feel like every indication says that this is such a pro Bitcoin and digital assets administration that I think this is the path forward. And like, I could not be more excited. And like, you just try to read the tea leaves along with everything you're hearing, and it's like, yeah, you can see directionally where we're going. And then I know I even don't really like when I hear people talking about, zooming out and having patience and we're in this for the long run. But, you know, if you're, I'm going to be 43 in March. Like if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, like you still got time. And I just think that we're so early that we're going to look back even 6 months from now or 12 months from now and be like, wow. Because I do it all the time. Like 6 months ago, I look at myself, I'm like, man, I was an idiot. Like I'm still an idiot, but like I was really an idiot 6 months ago. So I think if we just stay on that learning path and yeah, be as long as you can be without losing sleep and obviously make your own decisions. But I just think directionally it's pretty exciting and hopefully pretty obvious where we're going.
Nice. I will say, Tim, I did think you were maximum in your 30s. Well done there with 42, soon 43. Ben, what's your do you have like what excites you about MicroStrategy, or what do you feel is not getting enough attention? Like, how do you see this play out over what could be, the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months of a bull run? What are
Yeah,
people missing?
I think it's the surprises, right? Like if we had been talking last September, September 2024, it would have been really difficult to predict the 21-21 plan, right? And so like I was long, a lot of us were long, thinking, okay, I think there's going to be more leverage added. There's going to be more ATM usage. This strategy will ramp up, and then it hits you, right? They reveal their plans, and there's massive upside in a short amount of time, and it's very exciting. But I think going forward, it's kind of a similar thing, right? Like we're sitting at this point where MicroStrategy's balance sheet is extremely under leveraged, and we have a pro Bitcoin administration. I think there will be another surprise, whether that be, additional leverage, converts. We've already seen the preferred stock. There's a lot of unknowns, and the unknowns in our case are very positive. All the unknowns, all the new information shareholders have been presented with have, surprises to the upside. So I'm just excited for kind of how the strategy plays out and how much flexibility they have moving forward, right? Like with a 15.9% debt to equity ratio and Bitcoin's price potentially rising over the next 6 months, like they're just thinking, how do we capitalize on this to the best of our ability? And so like worst case, it's another 5 to 10 billion worth of converts. Best case, it's something we don't even, can't even think of yet. It's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I quickly tried to answer Ben here, but that's why I got a spelling mistake in there. He says it sure sounds like Tim, but he's not wearing an orange tie, so it couldn't be in it. And that's why I said like it's an AI spun up for the based on the many hours of podcasting that
Tim's
Tim is
time is too
doing.
valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't afford the real thing, so but yeah. In terms of expectation, and this is very dangerous to come into even thinking about price expectations for the year. So maybe we should just completely stay away from it, because very quickly, even though none of this is financial advice, people might start influencing their decision based on, if I say that MicroStrategy could hit 2000 in October and it only hits 800 or 400 or whatever. But by the way, we're there now, so that's not going to happen. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on how you see this, like price levels, or should we just steer away from that risky minefield of liabilities and expectations and people get burned?
I'm super comfortable sharing it. So
Awesome.
I can
Let's
give
go.
like a framework. Like, you look, so you have your Bitcoin price targets, and then you have your MicroStrategy Bitcoin acquisition targets, and then you have your kind of mania bubble equity forward-looking multiple on top of that. And so you can, reverse engineer any sort of price target you want. You can adjust those numbers to your liking and get a price target as high as you like. But I think the important thing to do here is just use history, right? Use kind of and justifiable multiples and realistic price targets, and then make your decisions take on those. And that really gives no substance, but yeah. So just think about those things and reverse engineer your own price targets would be what I would say.
All right. What about you, Tim?
So I was on a space earlier today, and Bram Canstein mentioned that two Bitcoiners had told him that there is an executive order drafted for the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. Now, I have no reason to think that that's not accurate, but if we just assume hypothetically that that's accurate, I think we're going to $1 million this year on Bitcoin, and I think MicroStrategy's bumping up against $2,100, if not higher. Those prices don't correlate exactly, so if you're looking at a model that you made yourself, I'm just saying I think that's the minimum if you see these nation states starting to FOMO in, and even without that, if you just look at that $100,000 price that we're around, historically, a 10 or 20x per cycle isn't. I mean, that's the historical norm. So,
Was
yeah,
that?
I'm sorry,
ahead.
I got completely distracted there because I put that chat message up that said that's Tim the question mark, and then I wanted to reply to him. And I think I'm using Restream here, which is a great tool. But I think I might have like reported and blocked this viewer. Like, my bad. If anybody knows the person who said that, please give the message. I'm sorry if I kicked you off the stream. That was not my intention. So Tim, I got a little bit distracted there. What did you say your targets were for MicroStrategy and Bitcoin?
Bitcoin $1 million, MicroStrategy $2,100.
Wow, $1 million this year on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm out there publicly saying by 12/31/25 $1 million Bitcoin. Now, is that a blow off top, or is that just the beginning because you have nation states FOMOing in? I don't
Yeah.
know, but that's my gut feeling, not financial advice, Anders.
Yeah. Of course. We're just speculating.
I agree with the 2,100 MicroStrategy.
That's a nice one. Like I said, 2,000, but I'll adjust it to 2,100 because I like that number. That's awesome. It's funny I was watching part of the inauguration at Matteo's place, Matteo Pellegrino, who's the founder of Orange Pill App, earlier today, and I went to get my my morning coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and they give you a number for when to identify you at the table when they're bringing the food, and they gave me 21, so I felt all right, it's in the cards here that there's gonna be an SBR, so I have my hopes up for the next 6 hours that which is LA time, that we'll get that announcement. We'll see. First and foremost, we gotta get Ross out. Yeah. So, what else? Is anything else you guys want to touch upon? We have 4,000 viewers. We've been going for about an hour. I know that in 1 hour, you guys have the internal call for MicroStrategy True North. Is there anything else that you guys want to touch upon here? In terms, I could just, while you think about that, I could add. So I did add, like, I am adjusting my MicroStrategy target to the great financier Tim Kotzman's target of $2,100. And then for Bitcoin, I think Dr. Jeff Ross, he was saying between 450 and 500. I think that's very plausible, but keeping it conservative, I would say minimum 200, likely above 250. I'd love to see, and I think it's very realistic that we get close to 500,000. If we do a 1 full million, that'd be awesome too. For me, it very much depends on the final boss of hyper Bitcoinization is when a country like United States that has the most powerful currency and ability to just print, if they say, oh, we're just going to print more now and buy it, like, Bitcoin is still such a small market cap of what is, are we around 2 or just above 2 trillion? United States government debt is what, 34 trillion? Like Bitcoin is such a small thing yet. It's still so early that they could just print a lot of dollars and buy a lot of Bitcoin. And if that happens, that's the final boss, the way I see it. So
Yeah, I
I
think
think there's a good point here actually, from Scott O'Brien. So what what you're talking about, Tim, is like a 10x on BTC and a 5x on MSTR. But since MSTR is a levered play, don't we have to upgrade that MicroStrategy target then if Bitcoin hits 1 million? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Dan, are you of the camp that if every time Bitcoin doubles, MicroStrategy would do a 4x, or do you think differently from that?
not quite. I don't think it's that algorithmic, but that's
Yeah.
like decent. My models are exactly, or my thinking is the exact same as Andrew's. I think 400s would be like a blow off top end of year. I think 200 to 400 is like my strike zone. And then MSTR, it depends though, right? Like they lever up here and they show real BTC yield and just the winds carry in your favor. Yeah, that could be a 4,000 MicroStrategy price at 300K Bitcoin. I wouldn't, but I think they will continue to kind of act independently at different times. I don't think it's just a 2-to-1 play. It just can't be, right? And if they introduce a new product, if they introduce any sort of yield or lending or even hint at that, if they get repriced like a growth company, all models get thrown out the window. So if they just demonstrate the ability to generate cash flow in any other way than their current BTC yield, like forget it, right? It could go ballistic. So especially during peak FOMO. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
I like that. What's your thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, I just think the public, all of us have always had a unit bias when it comes to Bitcoin. If you just focus on BTC for a second. And now that we're at $100,000, I think it's really unfortunate. Let me say it in a different way. The ETFs have helped to solve some of that unit bias, because someone that just hears about Bitcoin for the first time, maybe they're older, they go to their retirement account, they can buy 100 or 1,000 shares of IBIT or Bitwise or Fidelity, because those shares are $10 or $100 or $50 or $40. I think that helps. I know there have been different conversations around, and that it's very unrealistic that you're going to have every single player in the space. We'll pick on Coinbase for easy example, for everybody to just reprice to Sats. But at $100 million of Bitcoin, it's $1 per sat. I mean, that I think would be one of the greatest marketing things for price and understanding that we could do, is like, hey, there's this new meme coin called Satoshis, and like you should just go buy them as fast as you can. I think that unit bias is really sticking with us, and it's kind of, I think unfortunate overall, but fortunate to those that can see past it, if that makes any sense.
No, for sure, and I would love that. I would love if people start focusing on this new coin called Sats, being Satoshi's subunit of Bitcoin. It would people would have less problem with unit bias, and all of a sudden they would see Bitcoin as cheap, which it is, in my opinion, because it's going to 20 million and 50 million, and then continues up dollars per Bitcoin in today's purchasing power also. And some people feel it's too late, but there's not even one Bitcoin for each dollar millionaire in the United States alone. So they are going to be priced a lot more expensive. And right now, you could definitely, I love the meme that Bitcoin costs $0.1 million to kind of reset it a little bit. So people see like, oh, it's so much less than $1 million. Like that's the mindset we want to have. We want to count the price of Bitcoin in millions of dollars. I think that's fair. We can change it when we go to I don't know, 100 million. Oh, no, I still like that. But you raised something interesting, Tim. It's something that I've given a fair bit of thought myself, and I do believe I brought it up last week with Ben and Jeff, and that is Saylor talks about he wants MSTR MicroStrategy to go up 1.5x of Bitcoin, but one thing that is lacking from that discussion is, well, which time period are we talking about here? Because it can't be on a daily basis, because then it would be a much bigger difference in the overall period of time. Like if I look at when I got into MicroStrategy myself, which was around, again, family members have been lucky. I put them in 21 in MicroStrategy, but I was no exposure myself, but happy for my family members that got in earlier. I mean, I've been in Bitcoin, so it's fine. But the price of MicroStrategy from the 1st of October to now, let me look here, has a little bit more than double. If we use this as a 3.5 month period, it's gone from 168 to 400 roughly. So it's more than doubled. In that time, Bitcoin has less than doubled. It's gone from about 63,000 to a bit more than 100. So in that period of time, in a 3.5 month period of time, I don't even think that MicroStrategy has done 1.5x yet compared to the growth of Bitcoin. Now, granted, all weeks and days are different. You can't say this is generally what happens in a 3.5 month period, because then maybe there's periods with more ATM, and then there's periods with more convertible bonds. But I think it's a really important part of that equation is that when you talk about MicroStrategy going up 1.5x of Bitcoin, are we talking per day, per week, per year, or because compound interest over time makes a pretty big difference on how often you compound the interest. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Any of you?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go.
Dan, you want me to go
you go
first?
You go first.
Too much of a curveball? Do you want me to repeat anything, or
no? That was my internalized.
No. No. I think over some reasonable amount of time, so call it quarter over quarter or year after year, some sort of non-ridiculous time period. And I think, and we can make rationale and give reasons and excuses for all these different things. The first thing that came to my mind, just to get it off my chest, is yeah, their leverage is down right now at 16 or 17.5%. Usually it's in the low 20s. So like if you look at that $168 up to the 540, and what if you did more converts, before the end of the year, maybe it would have blown off at 600, whatever. Like, I think it's within range without doing public math. But yeah, I think some reasonable time period, a quarter or two, 6 to 12 months, that's what they're targeting. But if the last little bit's been any indication, maybe we'll have our expectations exceeded from time to time.
Yeah, those are the swings, and we love that because that's the unpredictable volatility, and Saylor needs that to make the shareholders richer, more sats per stock. What about you, Dan? What are you thinking on what's the time period we should think about this 1.5x movement in MicroStrategy compared to corn?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because I thought, from my understanding, is originally the 1.5x was to explain their leveraged debt structure. That was like, okay, a 25% BTC or debt to BTC ratio is effectively 1.5x leverage in that debt package. Okay, now you've got this whole business of products and accretion and insane accretion over the last 3 months. are they going to keep performing at 1.5x over long time periods? Bitcoin, I think it's more. I think MicroStrategy is really cheap right now, just because you look at their BTC increase per share, right, 80% last year, and their leverage, which gives you another justifiable 1.5-ish x leverage. Like, and then you extrapolate that out into the future. I think the returns on MicroStrategy will be better than Bitcoin by more than 1.5x over long periods of time, significantly more. But obviously that comes with the volatility, the risks. They could go bankrupt, right? Like that's the risk you run. I'm not saying they will, but like.
No, I know. It's
right.
no, smartly worded there, because people do need to understand that it is different to buy spot Bitcoin and stock, and stocks do have some level of risk. Again, I want to repeat what I've said a few times. I know I also said it last week, that I personally see Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, and it's not financial advice, it's personal opinion, and I could be wrong, but I do see MicroStrategy as a very rare combination of something I personally consider a very safe investment, and with a very high likelihood of at least 100x over, say, 15 years. It definitely a very, very high return. I know all three of us agree that that they will become the most valuable company in the world, and that's 30x just from here, as a matter of time, because no one else will catch them in the amount of Bitcoin that they hold on the balance sheet. And Bitcoin, when it takes over as money of the world and starts hitting some of those prices, it's going to be so important for the valuation of a company that there is, in my world, there's no universe that exists where MicroStrategy won't become the most valuable company in the world. And then after that, add some, because we only just got started. And the value of Apple today is nothing like what the value of the company that holds the most Bitcoin in the world will have once Bitcoin really starts hitting its full potential of $20+ million, at least as a beginning. So, okay, I think, like, looking back historically, that 1.5x might be something that we could expect on a 6 months period, which also means that on a 12 months period, well, then it is more than 1.5x, in my opinion. I do believe that if we're looking back, that a 12 months period, we might get twice the growth. And I think looking back, that is what we can see. Correct me if I'm wrong from your top ahead math, but MicroStrategy significantly outperformed. Actually, it could be interesting to look at 2024. I don't know if you guys have the numbers top of your head. I think Bitcoin went from around 40 to 100. So Bitcoin did, how is that, 150% return? Now, you guys were in MicroStrategy 1 year ago, so maybe I can ask you, how many percent did MicroStrategy grow last year? If I can
700
just go look.
pre-split. I think they
Yeah.
dropped down to 500 pre-split when Bitcoin's at 40K after the ETFs were announced, I think.
Right.
So what is that? Call it 500.
Well, so if I look at 1 year ago, 20th of or 22nd of January, then the price was around $47. So it's gone from $47 to $400. So that's a lot more than the 150% that Bitcoin has grown. So I think that's if that's any indication, I think it's looking good for MicroStrategy shareholders, and it is what I would expect going forward as well. I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, 24 was a significant outperformance for MicroStrategy compared to Bitcoin.
I think so too. And they're stronger now than they were. Like, their strategy's more refined, their leverage is lower. The carrying cost of their debt is $10 million less annually right now than it was at this time last year. So like, their debt is 2.5x more with 10 million less a year in carrying cost. So they're like, the leverage is a non-issue, and they have access to this crazy amount of ATM. So the health of the company, the favorable wins, it's just like, you can't think about it too much, or you'll buy too many call options. So
Now that you
Exactly.
mention or you buy too many call options, I just want to say that I truly hope that we'll have a bear market in 26, because I do want to try and time buying some long dated call options, aka leaps, on MicroStrategy when we get, end of 26 or whenever that may be, if we even have a bear market. But I would love to buy some ridiculously cheap leaps on MicroStrategy dated 2 years out or something. That would be that's how you get that 100x return or whatever. Tim, you wanted to add on that, I think, what Dan was saying.
I was just agreeing that if you think about it and do the numbers a little too much, a little too long, you're just going to continue getting long, which is not a bad thing, but just be irresponsibly long responsibly, if that's even possible.
I'll take it, Tim. I'll take it. I think being irresponsibly long MicroStrategy is very responsible, to be honest. So I think it is possible. I think it's a good thing. All right, Scott.
And to your point about a bear market and buying calls, totally. I don't see a way in which the universe gives us that opportunity again. Like, it just wouldn't make any sense. It would blow my mind if somehow the financial markets gave us the opportunity to purchase MicroStrategy call options at a depressed implied volatility with Bitcoin at 100K or sub 100K in 26. If the market gives us that opportunity, the markets are not efficient. That will be my conclusion.
Luckily, I don't think the markets are very efficient. There are a lot of people that just have not educated themselves, and they're, to their defense, there's a lot of things we maybe haven't educated ourselves on. But I know we're all very deep into Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, but the market has been highly regarded many times, and is it currently in many areas. So I crossing finger for that 26 bear market. What else haven't we touched upon? I know you guys, you have a call in about 35 minutes internally in MicroStrategy MSTR True North. Is anything else you guys want to touch upon here? Otherwise, I do want to give you a chance to rest before you go on that call. I could talk MicroStrategy and Bitcoin all day, but I do want to respect your time.
Maybe talk events. I don't know, Anders, are you going to be at any of the events coming up over the next 6 months?
Yeah, so I was planning to go to MicroStrategy World in Florida, which is May 5 to 8, I believe, something like that. But I now have so my schedule for at least until October after my home burned have been completely upside down. So I'm gonna be splitting time between an opportunity to I'm here in a bedroom in the valley in Los Angeles, where I'm very happy to be and have a shelter and a home. I refuse to go back into the currently overpriced renters market in that area where for family reasons I need to be. So because of my expectations of the bull run, I think that October is the time where I will feel that I'm willing to tap enough into the world's most superior savings technology, aka Bitcoin, of course, and MicroStrategy, to go back to that renters market, and then hopefully it's calmed down a bit. So for that reason, I will be spending a lot of time in Denmark, and there's an event early May in Denmark that I really want to be at, and that's a new thing that's come up. So pairing that with the fact that I'll probably spend half my time between now and October in Denmark to just be stay with family and stay with friends. I unfortunately think I'm gonna miss it. I have big time FOMO over that. I do have already purchased ticket for Las Vegas, the Bitcoin Magazine conference in Vegas, and I got that there's an extra events ticket package where there's some, I think, pool, like day clubbing, nightclub, different things. So I bought that as well. but it looks like I'm gonna miss out on MicroStrategy World. Otherwise, I will have severe jet lag when I need to be like in shape in Denmark early May. What about you guys? What are you going to attend? I'm sure you're both going to be in MicroStrategy World, and I'm sorry not to be able to hang out with all of you. To be honest, that's
Yeah,
a
that would have
bummer.
been really fun. We would have loved to meet you for sure. Tim, we're kind of running the circuit, aren't we, Tim? Good. Yeah. Good.
What is the circuit? Tell
Yeah,
us.
and Dan, because Andrews, I met you at
Yep,
the party that you threw, the events by
that's right.
Anders in Santa
Say,
Monica. In
Cool.
Santa
Wait,
Monica, that was
there,
awesome.
it is. So yeah, thank you for that plug there. Yeah, it was great to meet you. You had just started your podcast. I'm like, I know this guy, and then you've done a lot more since then. But yeah, thank you for attending. That was awesome, Tim. But tell me,
Yeah,
what's your thoughts and what are you attending this year?
yeah. So yeah, I'll be at MicroStrategy World. I'm actually helping them to promote the event, so I have a discount code if anyone wants to reach out for 20% off their admission.
I
Bitcoin for
I used
Corporations
to be
is
able
May
to get
6th
sorry,
and
I used to
7th.
be able to get fireworks. I just wanted to support you back, Tim.
Oh
But
yeah,
it worked
I don't
forever
know if we
until
can or
last
not. Yeah.
Monday. But Tim, yeah, share. Why don't you just? I don't have a discount code for that, so why don't you just share yours and people can get discount and you can get um some volume out of that or some momentum in this. Tell us what's the discount code you have there?
Yeah. Yeah, the discount code is just KOTZ. You put it in right when you're checking out, you'll get 20% off your ticket. I think prices go up end of February, so people have some time. I think it's kind of early days, but good to just check off your list. Um, in my conversations with MicroStrategy, it's going to be, focused on corporations. It is called Bitcoin for corporations. So, yeah, they they have CEOs, CFOs, founders attending, and certainly anyone can attend. But it's going to be more corporate focused. It's going to be certainly a lot smaller than like the huge, Miami or Nashville or this year Vegas sort of tens of thousands of people. So I think for people that are more corporate focused and that enjoy a little bit more of an intimate gathering, I think that's a good opportunity. Then yeah, I'll be in Vegas for the Bitcoin conference. And what am I missing,
You talk
Dan?
New York.
I feel like there's
Talk New
something else that
York.
we're gonna. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Bitcoin Investor Week, February 24th through the 28th in New York. Um, Dan and I will both be there attending, and I think tickets for that are at bitcoininvestorweek.com or something like that. So yeah, lots of good events coming up, and as you mentioned, Andrews, May is going to be a busy month, so that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll come back from Denmark so I can go to Vegas. I already got the hotel and everything. So and the ticket back when I bought it in July or something, and paid over 10 months or whatever up to the event. So you feel it's a little bit less uh expensive because you can split it out. So that was already booked a long time ago. So I really, of course, I'm gonna do that. Um you said that the code COTS was for the MicroStrategy world. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So if yeah, I'll repost the link and
Yeah.
everything here shortly. But yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
And I presume, well, I did in on YouTube in the show notes down below. I do have both of your X profiles, and from the X profiles, I'm sure people can find everything else that you're doing. Like you're posting, of course, your interviews, Tim. Um, yeah, any closing remarks or any other thoughts, things that you wanted us to touch upon in MicroStrategy, but we haven't? Anything that you want to share? We don't have to end it right here if there's some other topic that you do want to get into. Otherwise, um, closing remarks. What's on your mind?
I'll go first if you want,
Yeah.
Dan. I really appreciate the invite, Anders. This has been fun. And what I think's really cool, lots of cool things about social media, but people will sometimes tag me and another person, say, oh, you should talk to them, or oh, you should interview them. And that's super helpful because there's so much going on that there's like amazing people out there that if it wasn't for people kind of connecting people with other people, it's just there's a lot going on, and you got to sift through all this stuff. So I super appreciate that. And yeah, anytime anyone is in the New York area, it's just always great to meet up with people in person. So yeah, if you're in Manhattan, don't hesitate to reach out, and maybe we can grab a coffee, or just say hi.
Awesome. And thanks for coming on, Tim. I'm glad. Like it is my ambition to eventually have everyone from MicroStrategy True North on. I think everyone has a lot to contribute, and different angles. So it's important to get everything. Have you gone to PubKey, Tim, in New York?
Yeah, actually, when Neethu and I were in the studio together afterwards, we went to
Nice.
PubKey, and we had some beers, we had some burgers, and of course, he paid in Bitcoin. So that was a super cool
Nice.
experience. And I've actually been there many times. My girlfriend and I were walking around on a Saturday, and we walked right past it. It's maybe 5 minutes from her apartment. So yeah, if anyone's in New York and specifically going to go to PubKey, definitely send a DM, say hi.
Awesome. Dan, what about you? Any final topics you thought you want to just we touch upon, or otherwise final thoughts? And also to you, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an honor, and great content to have both of you guys on. What do you say, Dan?
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I love being on, talking to you guys. It's always refreshing talking to kind of like a new group. So this has been awesome, Anders. And yeah, I have nothing else really. My analysis is on my Twitter. I think hopefully we can all be excited, and people need to not freak out about this strategic Bitcoin reserve thing. Like everything's good. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
it's gonna come. I've heard also from different people that are more reliable than the ones writing necessarily like breaking in capital, and like I have heard from, but I've heard from people that I trust, that have heard from someone that went to Mar-a-Lago that they knew, and like it I expect it to happen. But let's see. We may need to take a few days. I'm gonna go back after this now and watch the inauguration and see what else is being signed. But yeah, once again, just thank you both very much, Tim and Dan. It was a pleasure. I look forward to have you guys back. And best of luck with whatever you're working on, and I hope we'll stay in touch, and we'll see what the future brings. Right now, I think SBR is interesting. I want to see MicroStrategy lever up a whole lot more than currently. You spoke about that, Tim, as well. And Saylor said it. He promised us back in December that Q1 is for levering up. So let's get some of that lever up and buy Bitcoin for borrowed money with unencumbered Bitcoin. And then when the price of Bitcoin rises, it just goes even faster for MicroStrategy if we can buy some more corn on convertible bonds. So on that note, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for you viewers listening in and watching. I am doing MicroStrategy every Monday, roughly 5 p.m. PST. It always is a little bit adjusted to what the guests are able to do, and I'm having fun doing this, and I hope to see you all next Monday. So on that note, thank you all, and cheers on the next one.
Cheers, guys.